All right. Well, everyone, welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh, and today we have two very special announcements. Number one, this is our premiere show. And number two, uh, we got David Rendall here, man. I am so pumped to have you, bro. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So, look, before we get started, I want to talk about the format of the show for a second. We are bringing together change makers from all over the world who have really lived their passions to create greatness in the world around them. And a couple things to know about live streaming. For number one, we're live. So there's no cuts. There's no, hey, we got to take that again. Number two, start watch parties. If you're on Facebook, share this. This is going to be a badass half an hour of your brain exploding with information. Number three, ask us questions. Ask us questions. I have my team standing by. They're ready on Instant Messenger, and they're here to really answer any questions. For the questions to us, we'll be answering questions throughout the show. So don't be shy. Start watch parties. Like the comments you see, and yeah, those are the rules. You got any questions? Anybody? No? All right, fantastic. So I can't believe for the first show I get Mr. David Rendall. Is it Rendall or Rendall? Rendall. All right, easier. My last name is a bitch, so I always want to get people's right. So, David, my friend, welcome to the show. I'm so proud to have you. Thank you. I want to give a little background on you. Do you mind if I do that, and we'll get started?
Go ahead.
All right. So I'm going to read this so I don't screw it up. David has spoken to audiences on every inhabited continent. His clients include the U.S. Air Force, Australian government, Fortune 50 companies such as Microsoft, AT&T, United Health Group, Fannie Mae, and State Farm. Prior to becoming a speaker, he was a leadership professor, stand-up comedian, a nonprofit executive, and in between presentations, David competes in ultramarathons, Ironman triathlons. He has a doctorate of management degree in organizational leadership, as well as a graduate degree in psychology. He is an author of 4 books, 4 Factors of Effective Leadership, The Freak Factor for Kids, and Pink Goldfish. Dude, you are an accomplished man, my brother. Awesome. Tell us how did you get into all this stuff?
It just started, especially the Freak Factor just started with my own personal story. I was always in trouble my whole life growing up, and even sometimes at work because I couldn't sit still, be quiet, and do what I was told. And then I realized I was starting to have opportunities to stand up and talk and do my own thing. First, kind of volunteer, kind of on the side, and then as a professional speaker. And I realized how much it was changing my life, and I wanted to share that story and change other people's lives and have them experience that same fulfillment and that same excitement, and also have that same realization that maybe those things they've been trying to fix or change or improve about themselves were actually their best qualities, and they should be embracing them and amplifying them. So it really was just kind of a personal journey. I had an idea that I wanted to maybe start a business of some kind, maybe a consulting business, but I mostly just wanted to be a full-time professor, have my summers off, and that's sort of what I was. And then this personal journey happened. I started tasting entrepreneurship. I started seeing that was an even better fit for me than teaching, and gave me even more freedom, and that I was happier when I did that and more fulfilled when I did that. And it started resonating with people. I mean, when you heard it, it resonated with you. When people hear it, it resonates with them. And so that leads to more opportunities to talk about it. And that allowed me to quit teaching and make it a full-time business and keep going with it. And so, yeah, it just started, you're in EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. They're big on experience shares. And that's what it is. It's the Freak Factor isn't really like my advice for you on how to live a better life. It's my experience with discovering that the things that I've been told my whole life were my worst qualities were actually not just okay, but they were my best qualities. Yeah. And not only should I not be trying to moderate or eliminate them, but I should actually be turning up the volume. And that's not a small change. When people spend their whole life telling you to shut up and then you get paid to be a professional speaker, that's a big revolution. And so that's what it was. It's just a personal experience that turned into a shared experience of realizing this wasn't just true for me, this is true for other people. And it affects their marriages, their relationships, their parenting, the way they manage people. And so I speak to teachers and entrepreneurs. And so it has relevance too for people in so many different areas of life that it's really just kind of exploded.
Man, I love hearing that. Let me ask you a question. So So when you were told that you know, were not good, or these weaknesses, like what were those weaknesses that you're like, those are my weaknesses, those are my strengths? Like, can you give me like what's your best example of that?
Well, first of all, I never said that. When every adult in your life tells you something's wrong with you, you think they must be right. Like I figured they must know what they were talking about. So for a very long time, I believed them. And that was the thing. That's why I'm so passionate about this message. I'm trying to tell other people what I wish someone would have told me, right? That this is, it's possible that what you're hearing isn't true. So the biggest ones were, hyperactive, can't sit still, right? And you can't keep tapping your pen, and you can't keep fidgeting, and you can't keep, so part of the not sitting still is then wanting to talk to the kid next to you and wanting to get up and move around and being disruptive and making jokes and those kinds of things. And so let's just take hyperactive, told my whole life I'm hyperactive. During this pandemic, I've done my first 2 100-mile running races on my own because the ones I was scheduled for got canceled. A couple weeks ago, I ran 7 marathons in 7 days and realized that's 183.4 miles. So on the next day, I ran 16.6 miles to round it up to 200. Now people say, wow, that's amazing, and even sometimes inspiring. And there's certainly people who are better than me, but it inspires and challenges some people to lose weight, to get in shape, to get better. And I get this praise and these rewards from being hyperactive.
Yeah.
And yet my whole life growing up, I was criticized and punished for being hyperactive. And that's one of the things I teach. And I didn't manage or moderate my hyperactivity. Nobody thinks 200 miles is moderating. Nobody thinks doing an Ironman triathlon is moderating. So what I teach people is I actually amplified those same qualities that people said I should reduce. And that's when people started praising me and praising me and rewarding me for the very thing they used to criticize me for. And sometimes the same people, like my parents now are like, wow, that's amazing. And back then they were like, taking swings at me. And so that's what's so powerful about it is we believe, like we were talking about before the show, we believe we're supposed to fit in, we're supposed to conform, that there's these rules we're supposed to follow, that we're supposed to be normal and average and get a job and these kinds of things. And we shouldn't pursue our passion because that's unrealistic. And we hear those messages. And what I discovered is not only is that not true, but that we can actually crank up, we can actually go full time at some of these things that we think are problems or negatives about who we are. So that's probably it. Well, and the other big one was do what you're told, follow the rules, be obedient. I grew up in a very religious, very conservative family and in a very religious and conservative environment. So there's very much this idea that the people around you are in control. You should give in to that control. You shouldn't rebel. Right. And fight against that. And if you do, there's something wrong with you on almost like a core soul level. And then I discovered I could be an entrepreneur. I could build my own business. I could have my own ideas. I could pursue my own goals. And that was always the fight. I had goals. I had ideas. I had intuitions. I had strategies. But the external was constantly saying, those are no good. Those won't work. You're too young. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't have enough experience. Plus, you're already a bad person. How are you going to make these good things happen?
Yeah.
So that was another huge piece, is discovering that, again, not only did I not need to learn how to do what I was told, I really needed to tap into and start believing in myself that the ideas I had were worth doing. Even when I was in management, I had a boss who was probably 20 years older than me. And his constant thing was like, yeah, just wait till you're 50. You got to really just build up that experience. Your way is the childish and sort of like immature way. Yeah, you're having a little bit of success, but you can't rush it. And, you think you're right and I'm wrong, and I believed that for a long time. And then once I started my own business and I could, without any restriction, pursue my own ideas, and they started working a lot and started working really, really well, it just gave me more and more and more confidence. And that gave me more and more of a passion to share it with other people so they can have that experience.
Yeah, man. I love hearing all this. It's funny. When we spoke, I just met David pretty recently. We run in the same circles, but I told you about my twin brother. My twin brother, Mike, was same shit. He was told he was hyperactive, ADD. And like, you look at the school system and excuse my language, but I'm like, this is fucked. If you're a kid that is, and I was the opposite. I was, cerebral, good at
right.
the president of my class, honor student. I fit the box, right? But if you fit outside the box, the system says, nah, you're a piece of shit. And people would say crazy stuff to me. They'd say, hey, you know, your brother Mike's going to end up in jail. And I'm like who the hell are you to say? First of all, I'm a kid and they're saying this to me. Like, you know,
right.
And I have a mentor, and you know what he said to me? He said, you know, I think the number one thing, if parents want to raise good kids, and I think this applies to every adult who's trying to like make an influence on a child to then create a good adult. He said, I think the number one thing you should do is don't be too critical of your children. Don't criticize kids. Support them, build their confidence. And I just see it all too often that you have these, you know, look, most people, they live a life of quiet desperation, right? And then what do? They see a kid that's just this glowing ball of amazingness, and they go and say, I'm gonna go put that kid down. And to see that you came out of an environment that was constrictive and said, no, man, you suck. You're not good. And you flew your flag anyway. Fucking kudos to you, brother. Like, kudos to you.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I do the talk, because I think, like I said, I wasn't one of those people who was like, you know, you're wrong. When they're like, you're going to grow up to be a failure, I was like, ooh, that's a bummer. You know, like I just assumed they must know. I assumed they're the adults. They must know. And so I think there are people who, when they hear that message, have kind of the confidence or the self-assuredness or whatever it happens to be to go, you know what, you're wrong, and I'm going to be who I am, and I believe that's going to work. For me, it was sort of like an accidental discovery. I assumed they were right. And one of my friends actually said that. I gave him the book. I gave him my Freak Factor book like 15 years after high school. We finally reconnected because when I was in high school, there was no Facebook, there was no email, there was no nothing. So when your friends leave, they just leave. You never know, you know, unless you have the phone book for where they live, you got nothing. Right. And so we reconnected years later. I actually introduced him to the woman who's now his wife. And but he read the book and he said he got kicked out of high school. He said, I wish I would have read this then. He said, because they told me and my friends that we were going to be losers. We thought they must be right. So we stopped trying to do the things that winners do, right? Yeah. They made it true. They told us, you're terrible. You're never going to amount to anything. So we stopped trying to amount to anything because we believed they were right. They did such a good job of communicating their message. And we believed the adults enough that and he's like, Dave, I needed this, but I need it now and it's going to help. But I needed it 15 years ago so that I could have the confidence to know that what I was hearing from them wasn't the only side of the story. And so I think that's what's dangerous, because that's what keeps the lie going, is when you see so many of those people turn out poorly, or let's say your brother did end up in jail because of those messages he heard from those people, then they go, see, I told you, I'm right. And it's like, no, you didn't just predict it. You caused it. You helped to make it possible. The words we say matter, right? The words we say matter, and the ideas we tell people matter.
Yeah, man, you're speaking my language. Well, first of all, look, everyone, if you're listening to this, like, we have a badass conversation going on here. Start a watch party. I am us. Like some of these messages. We want some engagement around this because people need to be hearing this message that David's talking about right now. And going back to what you just said a second ago, words matter. And I'm kind of an addict around words. You know, I just wrote my book. It's coming out in September. It's the core value equation. And really, that's what it comes down to, is that I believe that the values that we use become the words that we choose, right? And so when you think of like how you support people now, and you know, you're now a name, you're on stages all over the world, and you're picking these words that support your values. You know, like, and I don't know if have you defined your values before personally?
Absolutely.
When
I was in college, a guy gave me 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I read that a long time ago and created a mission statement, vision statement, values, all those kinds of things. Yeah.
Would you mind sharing them, or any of them?
I think the one that I would share that's probably the most meaningful to me as it relates to this is generosity, right? I mean, one of the things I do is I support entrepreneurs through Kiva, through loans. And you can loan money to people, microloans all over the world, and then they pay you back and you can help other people out. I feel like it's our responsibility. It's sort of what I've been saying to this point, is I was blessed to stumble across an opportunity to be myself in the world and to amplify who I am instead of having to suppress that for the rest of my life and live a life of quiet desperation. So I want other people to have that same experience. I want kids to have that experience. That's why I wrote the kids book. That's why I go speak at high schools and at colleges and to teachers to hopefully change their minds and help get that perspective across. But I think the same thing has to be true financially. You know, if you've been blessed financially, I think it's your job to share those blessings with other people in the world and to contribute to the world and make the world a better place. And I think another one of mine, and this relates to being on your show and what you're all about, is about growth as well. I'm constantly listening to podcasts. I'm constantly listening to books on Audible. I'm constantly learning. I have a doctorate in management leadership, but I'm not done. I'm not like, well, you know, I did that. I got my education. It's every day. It's another book. Every day it's another podcast. Every day it's a TEDx talk or a TED talk or a video where you're trying to learn and get better. So I think those are two of probably the most important of mine that really guide me is am I being generous or am I being selfish? Would be the opposite. And am I growing or am I stagnating? I think those are two of the biggest values that I probably have.
Yeah. I love that, man. And you know, I'll tell you my limited experience, like we obviously just getting to know one another, you've been very generous with your time. And I think that's something that I think that it's funny, as I've been exploring this world of thought leadership, I find that there's some people that are really generous with their time and there's other people that aren't. And that comes across, brother. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing this with our show today, because I think that I believe firmly like that you get what you give, you know?
Yeah.
And you're an inspiration in that way. And speaking of that, so I want to talk to you a little bit about something that I just saw, that you just interviewed David Spade. Is that like, dude, you got to talk about this. I saw it online and I was like, no way, man. Like I love David Spade. I want to hear about this.
Yeah. So Entrepreneurs Organization, which you're familiar with, they organized a virtual event between the East region and the West region. And we did an hour interview online with David Spade. They needed someone to be the facilitator and they picked me. I guess they needed two Davids in one situation. We just got to talk to him, talk about, his experiences. People want to know a lot about his connection with Chris Farley. Yeah. But also, his brother was married to Kate Spade. And obviously that's a very sad situation with her suicide, but also he was very open about the business side of that and how those things developed. So that was very interesting to the entrepreneurs as well. It was just interesting to hear about his life. You think when someone's on Saturday Night Live that they must be killing it, but he's like, look, I was driving my beat up car across the country and barely able to pay my bills in New York. And I hated it there because I grew up in Arizona and there's no sunshine in New York and you're always in some kind of building. And he goes, I never realized my hair wasn't blonde. He goes, my hair turned brown when I went to New York City because I wasn't in the sun all the time. And so you hear about some of his challenges, that he wouldn't take an acting class. Talk about growth. He wouldn't take an acting class. He wanted to just be good naturally, and he wasn't. So he wasn't getting those callbacks, and he had to, he talked about having to have some humility and things like that. So it was interesting to hear the other side of the story. You think it's just this rise to success, right. But you hear about some significant challenges, and you hear that people who you think are already really successful they haven't actually made anything yet. Being on Saturday Night Live apparently wasn't enough to really pay his bills. It wasn't enough to launch everything else. He still had to get better. He still had to improve. He still had to work on himself. He still had to do more. So I think those were some of the interesting takeaways. And also, I think one of the things I was surprised about is you never know, and especially as an interviewer, as a facilitator, is the person going to be a jerk? Are they going to give you a hard time? Are they not going to talk? Are they going to make fun of you? Are they going to make you work for it? Are there going to be awkward silences and things like that? It was a new experience for him. I think a lot of celebrities are realizing, they got no other work to do if they don't do some of this kind of stuff. So it was a brand new experience for him and a brand new kind of audience. And he was very open to it. And I thought that was cool and said something about him as well, that he was willing to explore a new way of doing things. And he was willing to give it his best shot and not be like a diva about it or something like that.
Yeah. And what did he, obviously he was speaking to a group of entrepreneurs, and I grew up with Farley and Sandler and Spade. Like those guys were like my gods when I was in high school. But, now here he is 25 years later. And did you guys go into like what lessons, I guess, applied to, like, obviously the struggle part, I think entrepreneurs can relate to, but like what were some takeaways about what he's currently doing?
Well, I asked him that. I said, what do you think, has led to your longevity, And I think that's where he got back into, making the effort but also just, I think a lot of it was relationships, that I think he recognizes, and again, was humble enough about it, that if he isn't connected with Sandler, if he isn't connected with Farley, if he isn't friends with Chris Rock, if he's not, that unit is actually, more powerful together than any of them particularly are separately, I think Sandler has a certain amount on his own. Certainly Chris Rock has a certain amount on his own. So I think they recognize that sort of teamwork and those relationships, and he talked a lot about the power of being able to collaborate with those people, especially early on, and learn more about how to be funny. What he realized is he thought he was funny. Then he hung out with people who were really funny and was like, oh man, my first 7 ideas are bad. I need to keep going with these people and on my own until I get to the 8th, the 9th, because the first things are obvious and everyone's thought of those and there's nothing really special about that. So I think those people challenged him. And I think that's a good lesson for us, right? How can we build that network? How can we build those relationships where we benefit and we contribute? And I think that goes to generosity and growth. In fact, that really puts them together. When you're generous and you're giving to other people, you're going to get that back, and you're going to grow probably in relationship with those people if you're willing to make that investment instead of trying to be the solo act or have all the focus be on you. There wasn't any point where he's like, why are you keep asking me questions about Chris Farley or whatever? He recognizes that was a big deal. And that he even said, like, he's like, when I met Chris Farley, like I was here and I was like, holy cow, this guy, you know. Yeah.
Yes. I saw Adam Sandler did it was, I don't know, like a year or two ago. He said Farley's the funniest person I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
And so it's funny what you're talking about. There's like a quote by, I think it's Jim Rohn, where he says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember the first time I heard that quote, I started thinking, I'm like, my first thought was like, well, who the hell am I spending all my time with? Right. And then I started thinking, like, I was halfway satisfied with the answer, but more importantly, it's, you see what you're talking about right now, where people go like from a high school football star to college and they're like mediocre, or a guy that's a college football star that goes to the pros and they're like literally barely making the team. And I think that there is something about having humility. And even if you are the best of the best, that you can always learn more, because there's always going to be someone better.
Well, think about the people who were the best and constantly sought out coaches or constantly looked for ways to get better, right? Never were satisfied with that. I think I like what you said about humility. One of the quotes that I use a lot for my leadership book, the first book I wrote, is from Mark Twain, that says, keep away from people who belittle your ambitions. Small people always do that. But the truly great make you feel that you too can become great, right? And so I think it ends up being both. Small people tend to try to push other people down to make themselves feel good, but that also keeps them small. So it's not only something small people do, it's also a way that small people stay small. But they're really great, make you feel that you too can become great. And I think that there's a mutual lifting to that, right? I'm trying to help you experience greatness. I believe in your greatness, but that has a cyclical effect as well. And there's no way that doesn't, as you said earlier, come back to me in some senses. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting about the freak factor too, is when you learn that your weaknesses are strengths, you can have humility of, hey, there's a bunch of stuff I'm not good at, and have confidence at the same time. It doesn't require you to think you're the greatest or that everyone else sucks. You can have this perspective that's reasonable at who you are. I'm very, very good at my endurance activities. I'm very, very good on stage. I'm not amazing with social media. I'm not the greatest writer who's ever lived. I'm not incredibly muscular. Nobody wants to see me on the cover of a magazine. I can't do a single pull-up. There's so many things, right? And that's okay, right? That's okay. Yeah. I don't love technology and figuring out podcasting and live streaming and all these kinds of things. So I have some things that I'm very good at, and I have a bunch of things that I'm not good at, and that's okay. And what I want to do is build relationships with people who are strong where I'm weak. And if I can admit that I'm weak in the first place, then that's at least the foundation. So that's the other way humility helps, is if I can acknowledge where I'm not strong, then I can look for relationships, and I'm not threatened by those people who are, because they're not better than me. They're just different from me. They have skills that I don't have.
Yeah. There's, so that's I'm sure Strength Finder. That's the entire premise of Strength Finder, which is, and there's actually a whole movement right now that I've heard of around strength-based education, which is everyone has different strengths, right? And to your point, you know your strengths, and I think my father had said this great quote, which I want to harken back to what you said a moment ago. My father was a Persian. He passed away 20 years ago, but he was a Persian guy, real heavy accent. And, you know, in Farsi, the word son is Bobo. And he's a Bobo, listen to me. Never listen to anyone unless they are more successful than you are. And it was the best piece of advice he ever gave me. And I translate to this. When I've gotten so much bad advice from people that are not as successful as I want to be. So why would I, why listen unless they're doing what you're trying to do? Because there's
my daughter
place of failure, you know.
My daughter was she's a very good student, and so she didn't say what she thought, but she was in class one day, and we live in North Carolina now, but I grew up in Wisconsin, and so the Southern accent is sort of new to me, and my daughters have picked that up. And there's also a lot of Southern slang, and every place has their way that they speak that's incorrect, you know, as far as official. Anyway, so one of her friends said something that was grammatically incorrect, and the teacher of this small, you know, religious school in rural North Carolina says, you're never going to become a Fortune 500 CEO talking like that. You're like, and my daughter thought, but she didn't say because she's a good student. She's like, you're not a Fortune 500 CEO either. Like, how, you know, you're making $22,000 a year with no health insurance, and you're trying to tell people how to become a Fortune. What do you know, right? But you think somehow you know, and I'm supposed to, and that's the perspective that I didn't have. When I was a kid and went to the same kind of small private religious schools and had these authority figures tell me that I was never going to make it acting like that, talking like that, behaving like that, living like that, thinking like that. I didn't have the perspective to go, oh, but you don't know anything about that because you're not in that particular situation. And so I do think, and even sometimes I'd go farther, maybe don't listen to anybody regardless of how successful they are, because that's another mistake people make.
Right.
Is Warren Buffett's successful, I need to be more like Warren Buffett. Maybe, but maybe you have no strengths related to anything he's good at. One of my recent TEDx talk was called Oppositioning. The opposite of a good thing is also a good thing. eHarmony.com helps you find marriages and has a lifelong partner, and they use algorithms and they use questions and they have doctors and they do all these things. And that's great. And they're succeeding. And Tinder gives you a picture and you can swipe and you can hook up with somebody. They're completely different, and yet they're very successful. And if you're trying to create Tinder, you don't need the guy from eHarmony to be your mentor, because he's probably not going to give you the right kind of advice, right? And if you're really introverted and really cerebral and a really good writer, you don't need a mentor who's maybe really extroverted, really active, and an amazing speaker, because their advice is usually, I'm 6'6", and if I told all the kids in the world, you should get a basketball scholarship because you're not going to be anyone else and you can't be anyone else. We need to have mentors and people we believe in, but we don't need to try to copy it, because that's never going to work to just copy and paste to our life. That's not reality.
Yeah, it's funny. Also, I think as the world becomes more decommoditized, you know, where there's so many different things that you can be and how you can be it. And entrepreneurism is a really good roadmap for that. To your point, there is no roadmap. The roadmap is the one you're going to make.
That's
and by the time, if you start following a traditional path, by the time you get there, the whole ground's going to shift anyway, more than likely.
Yeah.
So I love that advice. And I wish I had taken that advice, because I found that I kept trying to copy the way others were successful. And until I said, I'm not them. I don't even believe what they believe necessarily. You know, and I think values, vision, and mission, vision, and values come into play. Your values may be completely different, even if you were strategically, intellectually the same as somebody. The way you look at the world, your worldview might be 180-degree different. So I think you're making an amazing point, man, that you have to carve your own path and then get people to support that path along the way. I love that. Thank you for that. That's amazing. Well, look, we're coming up here towards the end of the hour. What did I say? Oh, those pink unicorns and dinosaurs are brilliant. Okay, so that's actually where I wanted to go with this. You and I have a passion for the color pink. I love it, man. Like I'm all about the pink unicorn. Tell me about where that came from for you.
Yeah, so for me, it just started off silly. I'm not some kind of marketing genius. I have three daughters. For the last 4 months, I've been exclusively at home with those daughters, and so this is definitely true. I'm married. I've been married for 25 years, so I live my life with all women. So I started wearing a little bit of pink at my presentations as I would tell those stories, and then I started wearing some pink shoes, and that got a lot of attention, and it really caught people off guard. And then I started wearing some pink pants, and that was just a huge hit, and again caused people to ask questions. And then it just went crazy. I said, well, if that works, what if we put some pink on the shirt? And what if we get some pink glasses? And I got a pink watch and a pink wedding band, and now I even have pink tattoos because then I'm always wearing pink. And then people send me constantly. My Instagram is giant freaking pink, and I only post pink things on Instagram. That's one of the reasons I connected with you. I saw your book was pink, and I'm like, dude, I need to post that on Instagram. Where are you? Yeah. And so it just turned into a thing. And one of the reasons that it's valuable is because I think I need to practice what I preach. If I'm telling people to be different, I can't be living my life in a conventional way. I have to be, again, experience share. If I don't know if it works, I'm not going to tell you it works. I'm not going to tell you I have this idea. I'm going to try it out myself. And the other part is that the reason I keep doing it and the reason I've escalated it is because it causes people to do what you just did. Why so much pink? I just listened to a story about the original Piggly Wiggly, which was the first grocery store to allow self-service, the first grocery store to allow people to go pick up their own stuff, see how much it costs, take it to the front and pay for it. And they said, hey man, why do you call it Piggly Wiggly? And he said, because it causes people to go, hey man, why did you call it Piggly Wiggly?
Yeah.
Whereas if you call it the grocery store or Steve's grocery store, nobody has any questions. Nobody talks about it. Doesn't get anybody's attention. And so I learned that pink was valuable in and of itself because it caused people to go, hey man, why do you wear so much pink? And again, partially because it goes against our expectations of what men do, of what it means to be male, of what it means to be feminine and masculine. And that's exactly what I wanted to do, was challenge people's beliefs of what you should do, what the right thing to do is. Most companies use blue, red, or yellow because that's what you're supposed to do, and all those kinds of things. And so it is a great way to start conversations. It's a great way to people, what I tell people is, regardless of whether you're in business or you're in some kind of sales or marketing, wouldn't it be great if people were constantly coming up to you and going, hey, tell me what you're about. Tell me why you're like this. Tell me why you're walking around that way, instead of you having to go, do you want my card? Do you want to watch my video? Do you want to join me on Facebook? I got people coming to me saying, what are you up to? Why do you live your life this way? And so it's just become fun, but it's also become very, very effective in starting conversations and building relationships with people. People send me pictures of pink things from literally all over the world. They're like, dude, I'm in Pakistan and check out this guy in this full-on pink outfit. And hey, I'm in Dubai today and check out this pink Rolls Royce, And so it also gives me a reason that people think of me all the time, when otherwise it's just, I'm just another speaker they saw one time and it's all over. It creates a connection, so that when they do need a speaker, or when they do want to share a book, or when they are looking for an idea or a guest or something like that, they think of me because I stick out. And so I think that's another thing to ask is, be yourself and all those kinds of things. But I don't think we have to go out of our way to be weird. I think usually we've turned down the volume on certain things that are weird about ourselves because we're trying to fit in and not get in trouble and do what we're supposed to. I think it's not about like making it up. Like I said, this wasn't some kind of marketing strategy of mine. It's just part of my life and who I was, right? I didn't plan to have 3 daughters. That wasn't some kind of strategy that I had. I was just being who I was. And I gradually got more and more comfortable with promoting that more and more and having that be on the outside instead of just on the inside.
Yeah, it's funny. So 2 things. Number one, people, when I talk about core values, people are like, well, is it my home values or my work values? I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what do you put on the mask and become someone different? So
and that's what they do. That's what we've been taught is, you have to be professional, whatever that means. And so, yeah.
No, that's BS. And I think that, to your point, that's always been inside you. And now you're flying your freak flag to go to your shirt there. But I'm with you, man. Like for me, like I'm all about it because it represents who I am. And the world, and I heard this amazing quote, and people don't love who it's from because Michael Jackson's got a bad name nowadays. But it said, Michael Jackson once said, if you want to be one of a kind, you got to be one of a kind, you know? And I'm like, we're all one of a kind, but everyone, you know, through growing up and through the things we've been talking about, we're taught to conform. And I'm excited for a world of nonconformity where people live in their strengths, live in their values, and make their visions and missions come true. So, brother, thank you so much for coming here today. Just a couple closing things. Like, is there any thoughts you want to give to our audience? And if there's one takeaway that you could give to any like gem you could give to them about the way you're looking at the world? You gave us a ton of gems right now, but any like final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the quote that really guides me is from E.E. Cummings, and I share it at the end of all my presentations. He says, "We do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals that deep inside of us something is valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch." And that's my mission, is to show people that deep inside of them something is valuable, but very critically, the thing that they've probably been told by parents, teachers, employers is the most worthless thing about them: their ADHD, their autism, their dyslexia, they're too fat, they're too skinny, they're too tall, they're too short, they're a minority of some kind. There's something about them that isn't just right. You know, that we do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals that deep inside of us something is valuable. Oftentimes, the very thing we've been told is the most worthless thing about us, that it's worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. And so I'm trying to build a world where people see that, but then also a world where people become the person who is revealing to others that deep inside of them something is valuable. So many more times recently, I've been able to do this for entrepreneurs organization or a YPO or an association, but then the spouses come, the partners come, the kids come to the event. We talk about parenting, we talk about relationships. I talk to the kids directly. I speak to teachers. When I can be in a room with people who are going to have, I did a radio show a couple months ago during the middle of the pandemic with a guy in Australia. And I think it's an actual radio show in addition to being a podcast. And he said he was at a bonfire, like at his neighbor's the other day. And this dude comes over and goes, "Hey, man, I listened to your podcast with that Freak Factor guy. And I'm a teacher. And I've already started using that in my classroom. And I've already started using that with the parents. That's the dream, right? That's the dream." And so that's the real, you talk about core values. That's my core values in a nutshell. We do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals it deep inside of us. And because it's deep inside, oftentimes we don't see it and they don't either. But deep inside of us, something is valuable that most people have missed, and maybe we have too, that it's worth listening to, it's worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. And that's my message. And if people believe that, and if they become that kind of person, I think that transforms the world.
Oh, man. So grateful for this. So look, in closing, how can we support you? How can the people watching this support you? And where can we find you?
Yeah, the simple place to go is drendall.com, D as in David, and then RENDALL, drendall.com. Or if you search David Rendall or the Freak Factor on Google, I'm the #1 thing that comes up. There's videos from the Freak Factor. There's the assessment for kids. The assessment for adults is just a simple 3-page assessment. I got videos of the kids' book on there, videos of my keynotes, videos from TEDx stuff that I've done, all my links to social. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram, Facebook, all my connections to social. So everything's at drendall.com. Tons of free stuff there. And then if you're ever interested in a speaker, or you need somebody on a podcast or something like that, just send me an email or connect with me on social.
Man, dude, this was an incredible 41 minutes, and we're so lucky to have you guys. Listen, go support Dave. David is just doing some amazing stuff, and the world needs more Davids out there. And so the only way that's going to happen is by supporting the work you're doing. And I'm so proud to have you as the inaugural guest on the Greatness Machine. Like I said earlier, guys, this show's all about revealing greatness in the world, creating greatness in the world, following your passions despite what the odds might say. And I just got a gift because David is purely a representation of that. Thank you so much, my friend. This has been
Thanks a lot, man.